Ladies and gentlemen, Mia Goth is in a new horror movie, so lo and behold, Creepy Gerald has to return to the podcast. Have no fear. Let's talk Maxxxine. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new episode of Two Peas on a Podcast, where we review the latest and sometimes greatest movies every week. Gerald is here with you, of course. Nick is still on vacation from the show, and I've been getting some dear friends of mine to come on and join me every week until he decides to come back. I don't know what the F is up with that guy, but he'll be back at some point. But this week, I'm very excited. We're discussing a horror movie. We're discussing Mia Goth. We're discussing Ty West. All kinds of stuff that I love, right? Maybe a guy that loves that stuff even more than me is joining me this week, if you can believe it. Justin, a friend of mine for nearly a decade. You know him from the Epic Film Guys. What's up, brother? Welcome back to Two Peas.
It's such a pleasure that after all this time you would ask me to be a guest on your show again. I'm
so professional you are.
So honored. I mean, I should be holding a gold award with, the
Really?
Two Peas logo or something.
I know. I should have sent that to you. I'm sorry.
No, man, it's honestly a pleasure to be here. You know me, anytime you ask me, I'll show up. And especially for a movie like Maxxxine, the third installment, or the third, if you will, in his horror trilogy.
Yeah,
I'll be here to talk about it. So thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you guys did an episode on it last week, I think. I have purposely avoided that like the plague because, I hadn't seen it when it came out initially, but I knew you were coming on this episode. I muted the hashtag on Twitter about a month ago, and I've been trying to.
Does that work? I need to know.
It actually has worked. It actually does work. It doesn't work fully because if people don't use the hashtag and they talk about it, then that'll show up. You know what I mean? And I'm all over Mia Goth stuff on Twitter, so I get a lot of that stuff and I just try to scroll past it real quick, But I have seen a few things here and there, but I haven't seen your take aside from just a few minor things that we've said to each other. We recorded a episode on your show about the new Beverly Hills Cop, and that was awesome. So 2 days in a row, me and you are together podcasting. So it's a good week. It's starting out to be a good week
again,
here.
Man. Yeah, back at it again. Yeah.
So the main episode this week is Maxxxine, the new A24 Ty West kind of 80s slasher throwback horror adventure that Mia Goth stars in with a cavalcade of others, including Kevin Bacon, Bobby Cannavale, a lot of great actors in that movie. We'll talk about that film. That's the main review tonight. Before we get there, Justin, I'm going to throw some questions at you from social media that we got submitted from fans and what we call every week one big question. All right. Let me pull this up here. Okay, I got one. All right. So first up over in our Facebook group, our dear friend and patron of ours that I know you know this dude really well too, Jared Taylor. I love this guy. He says, what is your favorite 80s slasher? But it cannot be from the franchises Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, or Halloween. Justin, what comes to mind?
Well, destruction in human form. To answer that question for you, it would be My Bloody Valentine.
Ooh.
That's my favorite. It's one of my favorite slashers regardless. It's in my top 5. So there you have it.
You might be surprised by my pick, but this is the first one that came to mind, and it might actually be the one.
Is it the one? Something. Is it really, truly the one?
Unless I'm forgetting something, but I'm going to say Maniac.
Whoa, okay. Going really
dude.
Mean-spirited and grimy and sleazy.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, listen, look at what we're talking about tonight. There are some very direct references to Maniac and Maxxxine. So
without a doubt.
Yeah.
Along with a lot of other ones. But yeah, without a doubt. But that was just, I don't know, man. It was just so gruesome, gritty, real, frightening, like real life scares. You know what I mean? I remember from Maniac. And I actually didn't mind the remake all that much.
No, remake's good.
I thought it was pretty decent.
That's what when I met Elijah Wood last year, that's the first thing I said to him. And he just like smiled at me with that weird, creepy smile. And I was like, cool. Oh, wow. And he's rocking the Hitler mustache now to him, like even more fucking weird, bro.
Yeah,
cool.
Dude, wow. He's doing his thing without a doubt. How about this one? Another patron of the show, Julio from the Contrarians, over on the Discord chat. He says, I'm kind of interested to see what you say here, Justin. What would be the perfect career move for Mia Goth now that this trilogy is over so that non-horror fans can be introduced to her and possibly take her more seriously? What do you think there?
I actually said this the other day. I mean, was it to you or to somebody else? I don't know. I'd like to see her like do a romantic comedy or like
Yeah, that'd be
a
good.
drama or something that's not, like genre. I mean, I love her in genre. She fits very perfectly in that world, if you will. She's done period stuff. She's done all kinds of stuff, but I'd like to see her be like a leading lady in a romantic movie, or she's got the chops very clearly. So, yeah, sure.
Yeah. I would. That would be. I'd be on board for that too. I mean, honestly, I'd be on board for anything that she did. But I'm trying to think if she could do some kind of historical biopic and who she could play. You know what I mean? Like who she kind of looks like, if she could take on like a real life figure.
I mean, Gerald, it would have to be someone with no fucking eyebrows, though. That's the thing. Unless she's gonna grow them back or get implants or tattoo them in,
Oh
I don't know.
God!
Just saying.
I mean, they could do anything now, man. I don't. I'm not gonna
CG
worry
them
about it.
eyebrows right the fuck in.
Let's do it, man. I mean, if Cavill can have it in Superman on the stash, then we can do something. I don't know. She doesn't really look like Janis Joplin, but I mean something like that. Where she's playing like a real life icon and does like a biopic that gets like Oscar buzz.
I honestly, I really would like to see her play like a sweet character. Like she shows a sweetness in this trilogy. She's shown it in other films as well. Just like an all around good character. Like you see what she does in Pearl, where she's like she can be a sweetheart, and
Right.
she's talking to the animals at the farm and stuff in the barn.
Right.
I'm like, I'd like to have that like a whole movie because she's so fucking adorable. So give
Yeah.
me all of that for a whole movie.
Yeah, I could see that. I
And
want to
not
see her in
kill
anything.
anyone.
Yeah, maybe don't murder anyone. It's for 90 minutes. Let's see what happens.
And don't kill a poor animal, please don't.
All right. So thank you for the questions, guys, and submitting them once again in one big question. If you want to get involved, check the show notes, Facebook fan group, Patreon, Discord, all that stuff, and you could submit questions to us every week, and we will answer them on the show. Justin and I have the task this evening of discussing and reviewing Maxxxine, the new Ty West film. Now, Justin, before we get into the details and what we thought of the film, we like to give our scores out of 10 up front, and we have not discussed it with each other yet. It's what we call the early score reveal. All right, man. So I will count us in, Justin, and then we will show our score on camera, and we will talk about how we arrived at that number. You ready, buddy?
I'm ready.
All right, here, let's do it. 3, 2, 1. Look at
No way.
Look
All
at
right.
that.
Look at it.
All right, so
Look at it.
We got 2 7s, a 7 from me, a 7 from Justin, which means a 7 overall. So 7 out of 10 from Maxxxine. Now, this is going to be spoiler free for a few minutes here, Justin. You're the guest on the show. So without spoiling anything for the specific plot of Maxxxine, although I do want to give a disclaimer that this whole episode could feature spoilers for X and Pearl. So also be aware of that. We will probably be referencing those 2 films as well, as it is a trilogy. But aside from that, don't spoil anything specifically for Maxxxine. But what were your general thoughts and why you arrived at a 7 there?
I mean, since it is a third part in some fashion to the other 2 installments being Pearl and X, and even though I go into everything with the same level of expectation, I tell people that and they never believe me, but I try to go into every single movie with the same viewpoint. There are movies that I'm more excited about than others, but I try to look at everything from the same. I don't want to. You always know will be so biased, totally biased. I mean, there's always going to be a bias, no matter what kind of film critic you are. But I thought the movie was solid. I thought it was good. I didn't think that it was bad. I didn't think it was awful. I didn't think that it was amazing, and I didn't think it was groundbreaking. I think there's just a middle ground, and there's plenty of movies out there like it. And I think that in the world we live in terms of film Twitter, or just this trendy way of like it has to be amazing, a masterpiece, and people just hashtag masterpiece next to everything, or it's a giant pile of trash and it deserves to be burned at the stake for the next 100 years. I just was pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but I was entertained by the movie. I'm a massive fan of De Palma thrillers, and I got that from this.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot we're going to talk about in terms of what Ty West could have done. And I'm not usually that guy that's like, well, he should have done this instead, because I'm not the filmmaker here. Listen, I'm just talking about the movie that he actually made, not what he could have or should have made. But I think that it just did a serviceable job in terms of wrapping things up with a nice, neat little bow, a little too neat. And then you're kind of like walking out of theater like, okay, so that was it. That's just what I felt from it. It didn't give me the same feeling I got from X or Pearl, where I said,
Right.
I cannot wait to go back to
Right.
the theater to watch this again. And I did that for both of those. And this one, I mean, I did want to give it a second viewing before I came on your show to review it. I didn't have the inclination to really rush out. And so unfortunately, it just didn't do it for me, which sucks because you know me, Gerald. You know the 80s, that connection
Right.
that you and I have. It's my favorite everything, music,
Well,
style, film, everything.
yeah, and in kind of mentioning that and piggybacking a little bit on what you're saying, and this can be an open discussion because you're more kind of intimately have that knowledge of the 80s cinema than even I do, but I was wondering and reflecting on Maxine specifically, not necessarily the trilogy, but on this particular installment, like, who this was, or I don't want to say who this was for, but, the people that haven't seen Body Double and Hardcore and Angel and Tenebrae and like all these different movies that are obviously homaged in this film, like,
Sure.
would they get it? Would they enjoy what Ty West was trying to do here? And because I'm familiar with a lot of that stuff, and I know you are too, I loved most of this movie as a result because it was almost like a callback to a lot of that 80s cinema that we love, that noir slasher. You mentioned De Palma, which is obviously an influence here. I mean, even the Italian horror stuff is kind of influenced here with Giallo. And I could see it from a filmmaking perspective, how personal it was to him of the things that influenced him, much like a filmmaker like Tarantino, who would sample and borrow from the kung fu cinema and a lot of the things that he grew up being influenced by. So I'm just curious, you know what I mean? Like, I'm wondering if somebody sees Maxine and doesn't know that origin from the 80s horror, and maybe they were born 15 or 20 years ago, and they just haven't seen or been exposed to a lot of that older 80s stuff.
Well, it's
What
a good
would they get
question.
from this installment? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, well, let's look at it this way, Gerald. Do you think that Martin Scorsese has seen all of those movies that you just mentioned? Because he just came out on Twitter or something. Someone just tweeted before we started this recording that he saw Maxine and liked it. And he was like, great reflection of the period and how films were made during then. And to me, obviously there's that clear discourse, when it comes to a certain type of genre and Marty's takes on that. But in this circumstance,
yeah,
he lived through that period. He made films during that period. And that to me was like the perfect representation of someone that knows what they're talking about, that would have a valid thing to say here. And a lot of people keep saying pastiche.
Sure.
This feels like it's a cutout of a bunch of different things. And sure,
that's
but
fine.
Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That's what the fuck influences are. What do you think they are? That's what every filmmaker does. Spielberg, I mean, dude, I could just list all of the most iconic filmmakers in the entire world. Kubrick, John Carpenter, it doesn't even matter. They're all just taking what they loved about the movies they grew up with and putting it into their own movies. So yes, but the one thing I'll say right off the bat here is, if someone hasn't seen all of those movies from the 80s, or someone young, maybe a 16-year-old kid that never got the opportunity to have a parent that showed them older stuff, listen, this is a great entryway into the sleazy 80s early thrillers and slashers and some of the giallo stuff that we have from that period. I think he does that in a very genuine way. I'll say this right now. It does not feel phoned in. And that's one of my biggest complaints of the last couple of years, where, Stranger Things aside, that gets a lot of shit, but I'm honestly sick of everyone trying to replicate the 80s. And when they do it, they just poke fun at it consistently. And I'm like, no, he knows his shit. Look at, he did the 70s perfectly with X. Pearl, brilliant.
1918 or whatever.
Dude, Technicolor. I mean, it just looked like, and, House of the Devil, another one that just nailed that period vibe and look. So when I would, if I had to pick a filmmaker, a younger filmmaker that could, reel in that 80s vibe for a movie, he'd be the one I would pick.
Yeah, for sure.
And he did a journeyman's job at doing that for sure. So
I agree.
I think that I would love to hear the perspective of someone young that went to go see this that hasn't seen anything from that era. It would be really interesting to hear what they have to say about it.
But do you know what I mean? Because it does just make you curious, because we'll see something that we see it and we go, ooh, body double, or
Right.
we
Right.
see
Instantly.
it and we go, oh,
Yeah.
like Vice Squad, the Hollywood, sleazy Hollywood
Yes.
streets order.
Yes.
But like, if I had never seen those, would I, you know what I mean? How would it translate to me? So that is a curious take. I'll just say before we get into spoilers, like, I like this thing. I mean, I gave it a 7. It didn't blow me away. I gave X an 8, and I gave Pearl a 9. So this is the least favorite in the trilogy for me, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I think it's a good complement to the first 2 films. I think Pearl is far and away my favorite because of how different it is and how
Yes.
it essentially was like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and a slasher. That's kind of how I thought of it when I saw it the first time. Just this pure girl on a farm that just kind of snaps and starts killing everything in sight. So it was very different.
And humping scarecrows too, and
humping
scarecrows,
and
getting wet and having orgasms on scarecrows.
And
yeah, that's the thing too.
Corn sweat there in there too. I mean, I love Pearl's my favorite for sure, and I think it's probably the best Mia Goth performance in the trilogy too, in my opinion. But they're all different though. Like, they all have that connectivity to them, obviously through this pivotal character, but they're all very different in their like structure, and obviously the setting is extremely different. But I've mentioned this 1,000 times anytime we talk about Ty West or Mia Goth on this show, or when I've come on your show or anybody else's for that matter. In Session Film asked me to come on their show and talk about this again tomorrow night, so I'll probably say it on that show too. But Ty West is a brilliant genius, in my opinion, of capturing a time and place. Like, he absolutely... When I see his movies, it's almost as if X was filmed in the late 70s and the footage was just unearthed. We just saw it. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not saying that necessarily like it even like he recreates a time. It's just like almost like he made it when it happened. You know what I mean? And there's just something authentic about the way he films the movies, and to be able to incorporate so many different influences that we've already mentioned, quite a few of them here in the open. I mean, I love the dude. I mean, I really, really look forward to anything that he does. I love Mia Goth equally from an acting perspective. So when the two of them team up, you would have to work really hard for me to not to at least enjoy it on some level. Like I said, this was the least favorite for me. It kind of fell apart in the final act, which we'll get into in the spoiler part. But overall, it's a good time, man. I mean, especially if you do have a connection to these 80s slashers that, kind of influence this film, I feel like,
I have to mention real quick, because I actually did not look this up prior to when we reviewed it for the first time on Epic Film Guys, but there were some shots in this where I almost questioned whether it was shot on digital or film. And while we were sitting here pre-show a little bit, I had to look it up, and apparently all 3 of these movies were shot on digital. So whenever there was any kind of film grain or, VHS styled work in these, it was all emulated, which I get. It's a thing. It happens, and it's cheaper, and it still works the same way. But man, I can't say enough. I mean, because
he edits his own movies too. The guy,
yeah, he does.
I mean, he edits his own films. So
yeah. He does. Yeah. I just would have loved to have seen. I mean, I get that it's an entirely different process. And if you're trying to make a movie today, it's not the same at all, but it would have been cool. But I'm glad that some of it looks like film, even if it is that fake film grain bullshit that I don't usually like. But it's Ty West, so I give him a pass for it.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. All right, I'll tell you what, Justin, let's take a quick promo break because this will be the spoiler warning. Guys, when we come back from the promo, we will be into spoilers for Maxxxine, so be warned. We will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are discussing Maxxxine, and as I said pre-break, we are going to be spoiling the hell out of this thing going forward. So Justin and I will be talking about anything that comes up in discussion about Maxxxine. If you have not seen it, please come back and listen to the rest of the episode after you catch it. And also, there will be spoilers for X and Pearl, most likely. Justin, we both landed on a 7, so symbiotic there in our kind of liking of the film. Starts out with a lot of 80s imagery and different actual footage from the 1980s, and D. Snyder doing his thing before Congress about parental advisory lyrics and a lot of other political things that were going on at the time, kind of setting the tone for where we were going to be in 80s LA. I thought, as we get into this film and Maxxxine has her audition, which is essentially the first real scene of the movie, one of the best scenes in the movie, because for me it was early, right? Because it's the first scene, but it was that scene that we've gotten in all these films where Mia Goth is kind of showing her character's gravitas and like what we can kind of expect from her. In Pearl, it came kind of towards the end of the movie when she has an amazing monologue, and then of course staring into the camera, smiling through the whole credits, which is an image that'll be in my head forever. But we get it very, very early on here. When this movie kind of started rolling in the first 5-10 minutes, how did you kind of feel about the setting and where it was going? And really anything you want to talk about as the movie kind of got going here. Where were you sitting in the early parts of this film?
I mean, I was actually like fully connected to every single second of it. I was just enamored by it because I've continuously said this for years, and it just, the 80s are my thing. I was born in 83. Yes, I didn't live through the 80s as an adult or a teenager, but everything about that period is near and dear to my heart. So,
yeah,
and particularly like the Hollywood system and what, the transition from what it was like in the 70s, where we had all these swashbuckling directors that would do whatever they want to do. And then by the end of the 70s, the studios were all being bought by corporations. And then of course we had like this, the studio system kind of died, and then things were a totally different animal. So the opening to this movie, I was just like totally connected with, loved every second of it. There's that juxtaposition, that connection of film and porn and the sleaziness of what the Sunset Strip was like during this period. It's 85, so it's not super early 80s. I feel like the only thing that we have the D. Snyder stuff. We have the stuff about, I think it was, I saw a Wasp reference. I'm a huge Wasp fan as well. Blackie Lawless and stuff. I saw that on the screen, but I didn't see a huge hair metal aspect in the movie. I'll mention that because hair metal in 85 was already a thing, and I didn't see any hair metal dudes at all in the movie. But
yeah,
in terms of the opening, though, I mean, I'm just saying straight up. I mean, 85, you would see a lot of motherfuckers walking around looking like Motley Crue. You would really, you would see that a lot. But I think, we get immediately back into who this character is with Maxxxine, and she's having this audition for the Puritan 2, despite all of her previous credits being just in adult films, and she crushes it. And one of my favorite moments is her just walking out of the audition and being like, y'all can go home because I just crushed that, or whatever she said. And I just laughed out loud in the theater. It was like amazing. She gets in her, I believe it's a Mercedes, right, convertible. And she just starts blasting amazing 80s music. I don't remember which song it was.
Great soundtrack. Soundtrack.
Yeah. But I was like, oh, I'm in 100%. Like, give me all of this shit.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she goes and she has to go to her second job, and,
yeah, without a doubt. And, I mean, the aesthetic and the soundtrack and the style of this movie is like in a stratospheric level. I mean, you could hit mute on this thing and it would still be a beautiful experience just to see it and see all the different 80s imagery. And, you mentioned when we were talking earlier, Ty West didn't over exaggerate the neons and the 80s. You know what I mean? He didn't go for that kind of cliche version of the era.
There's no synth score either. There's no synth wave score. He went for more of a, what De Palma would have done. There's an orchestral score. So he didn't do what every other motherfucker is doing right now, which is, hey, let's have bisexual lighting. Let's have tons of, there's 80s, there's neon in the movie. There's neon in the video store here and there. and on the Sunset Strip and what have you. But he's not going overboard like every other filmmaker does today, where they're like, oh, it's the 80s, throw some neon, play Motley Crue, whatever it may be, just fill in the blank. But we have to talk about that opening and that one shot, that single shot, that tracking shot where she gets to work and she's walking through the strip club. It felt like Goodfellas, man. It felt like just, steady cam, amazing work where she gets out of the car, goes in through the whole building. Oh man, that's the moment where I was like, okay, you've got me, dude. You have my wrist. You pulled me in. I'm yours.
Yeah, it was phenomenal, dude. And then, her, and was that right after that too, when she was in the nurse's costume? There's a little bit of callback there too. Yeah. Yeah, that was great too. I mean, like I said, the guy knows what he's doing from a filmmaking perspective. The thing with the story in this movie and the script, if you will, is did it, and we're into spoilers here, so say whatever you want, but did it satisfy this trilogy? Like, was it a worthy completion to the trilogy? Because that's the part I'm struggling with a little bit. Let me just point out a couple quick things about it, and then we can kind of talk whatever you want to talk about. But this is taking place during the Night Stalker murders, which was a real thing. I think it was
Richard Ramirez.
Ramirez, yeah. So I remember that. I was born in 1975. I remember that vaguely.
You old fuck.
It was a big thing, But, all right, so that's happening, right? And that's a real life scenario, and he's kind of putting us in that real life setting, and then we have all this fictional stuff going on at the same time, kind of around it. So where's the connection to you with this movie with the Night Stalker? In other words, I wanted it to be more realistically based on what happened in real life in the 80s, almost like, and I hate comparing Maxxxine to Titanic, but Titanic is a fictional movie, but it's a real life event that's kind of happening around them, and everything still happens in reality. They still hit the iceberg. The ship still goes, they get picked up by the Carpathia.
And to be fair, Cameron based his characters on real people. So.
Right. So, but you get what I'm saying. But this movie is like this, the Night Stalkers mentioned. They use actual local news footage when I had heard Ty West mention that actual footage of newscasters.
Which I noticed immediately, because if you watched, Netflix did a few years ago, I think what is probably the ultimate documentary on the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. It's there. It's amazing. It came out a few years ago. I've watched every single documentary that there is on the internet and any streaming platform on the Night Stalker or any other serial killer, because I'm really into true crime stuff. So to your point, I totally agree with you. And I was hoping that the backdrop would be more than just that it would be something where it would be a red herring, where you would actually possibly think that it could be the Night Stalker. But It's very apparent, Gerald, that as soon as we see our first altercation with Maxxxine and another individual, I'm like, yeah, that's just nonsense. There's never going to be any real connection to the Night Stalker at all. He's just using that as part of what the 80s during that period, what it was like being in LA and having this kind of panic of not only just there being a massive murder on the loose, but the satanic panic, what the protests were like during that period. Mm-hmm. I liked that he included it. I just wish that it had more to do with the plot and he could have utilized it so much better. Because here's the thing. You mentioned slasher in the opening of, obviously it has to be part of the description of the movie, but I didn't feel it was as slasher as it was thriller, because there's not as much stalk and slash here as I expected there would be. There's a couple great moments. We do see an amazing kill in the movie, which you could not ever consider anything else other than a slasher kill. But do we consider De Palma thriller slasher? There's that fine line between a thriller, giallo, slasher. Right. They're all in that same group, but I was really hoping for a lot more of Night Stalker stuff. If you're going to try to fool me. Don't just throw it on there for the sake of it. I guess I would rather have it there as it is, as it stands now, than not have it at all. But I just felt like he did absolutely nothing with it at all, other than just having them watching it on TV. or
Right.
mentioning it here and there.
I was hopeful that giving it thought, seeing the trailer and kind of knowing Maxine's like, rise to stardom quest that she kind of has for herself. I kind of saw a vision initially in the last few months leading up to the release of it was going to be a Night Stalker kind of story, and she was going to be a victim in that story, and they were going to kind of intertwine where the Night Stalker was essentially going to be our antagonist, and Maxxine was going to end up being the protagonist, and maybe it was revisionist history where this is what happened to the Night Stalker, even though, of course, we know what really happened. I mean,
Well,
revisionist history is always there.
And to your point, Gerald, it's very clear here that Ty West is extremely influenced by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This, to me, I said it in our own review as well, this feels like the 80s horror version of that for sure. But if you're going to do that, Tarantino was smart about it, and he used the Manson murders with purpose into his story and kind of retold them the way that he felt that the audience would react to them in a positive way.
Right.
And here we don't get any of that. And so heads up to your listeners, not ours. Oh, I forgot that it's not our show together.
Oh man,
wrong epic film guy, right?
It is this week.
But Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer. It's on Netflix.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of the visual aspect of it and all that, he nailed all of that. I felt disappointed that he wasn't at least trying to pretend like it had anything to do with that. Like anyone that knows anything about anything, when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, okay. It's not the
the ambiguity was just gone there. Yeah, for sure. I'll just go ahead and spoil the rest of the discussion.
Do it.
We don't have to jump immediately to this, but like the third act is what really brought this down for me. I mean, this was probably a 9. This was probably an 8 or a 9 for me until we got to the whole "I am your father" storyline and the whole religious cult thing with the dad or whatever. Like from that moment, and there were some parts in there that I really did like. Like the shootout at the end with Cannavale and was it Michelle Monaghan? I think is the female.
Yes.
The two of them as the cops that are kind of pursuing the story or whatever. Like that shootout by the Hollywood sign, like all that shit was great. Like, but that last act is really what hurt this project for me. But nothing before that. So it's really weird because like the first 2/3 of this movie, even with the lack of Night Stalker involvement, I was in, man. Like I was.
It's almost perfect,
great.
Dude. It's almost perfect. Great. And then, so there's that moment where, I mean, we have to talk about Kevin Bacon, which we will.
Oh, we will. We have to.
But there's a moment after the demise of a very specific character where Maxxine goes home and she turns on the TV and she's watching actual news footage, Night Stalker news footage. And then she just decides like, yo, I'm just going to go pick up this piece of paper with this address on it that I got handed earlier in the movie. Mm-hmm. And then from there, the movie just jumps forward. I feel like where it kind of, it skips like what I feel like could have been 30 more minutes or maybe even 20 minutes of movie. And then it just jumps to this climax, this ending. And it leaves you wanting so much more. What it leads you to, Gerald, is something that seems kind of phoned in and not a surprise and not a reveal at all. I'm just like, really? Okay, that's what it is. And then once you know what it is, which I'm not going to say, I felt like, okay, no, I mean, I can, but I really don't. I'm just, you're like, okay. From the first, when you watch X, you're like, I get it. Okay, I see where they're going here. It's telegraphed in a sense, but this is really all you're going to do with that? I was like, all right. Okay.
I think phoned in might be initially it was kind of a harsh way to put it, but I think you're right. I think it was an act. The last act was almost like a separate short film from the rest of the movie. Like it was just a weird detachment from what we had been, or at least I personally was engrossed in leading up to that point.
Sure.
And to be the third film in this I mean, let's just say it. One of the greatest modern horror trilogies. I mean, really. I mean, right? I mean, of the last 20,
Ever,
30 years. I mean,
ever.
yeah. I mean, easily. Yeah.
Seriously, ever. I mean, we could sit here and I mean, I assume it'll happen eventually. Maybe we'll do it later in the year, but we could sit here and talk about the whole thing. But I mean, name one filmmaker that did a horror trilogy where the quality
I
throughout
know.
was as consistent. It
You
doesn't
can't.
really exist.
You
Yeah.
can't. Yeah. So, but for that to be the ending to that, you can't help but leave a little disappointed. I mean, I feel bad about that because I am such a huge fan of Ty West, of Mia Goth, of
Sure.
even Kevin Bacon, who we can get into the discussion about his character if you want, real quick, and talk about some of the other performances in the film. Um, we were talking about bias earlier, so you know how you get a Hollywood pass, a hall pass from your wife or whatever. My pass has got to be Mia Goth. I am in love with her. She has always done just really interesting roles. She's always taken on those really quirky, unique, crazy, psychotic roles that are not easily performed in front of a camera, and she always just does an amazing job at it, in my opinion. I've been a fan of hers for almost a decade, and I love that the rest of the world is kind of caught up to her growth as an artist. I love her, but Kevin Bacon, man, in this movie,
Legend. And we're recording this on his 66th birthday, too, my
that's right.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume you saw him in JFK, but I loved him in that movie too. And he plays this kind of bayou detective who made his way out to LA, and he's got that same accent that he had in JFK, that really Louisiana heavy accent, and just so hammy, and the glasses and the fucking greasy hair and shit. Like, I mean, right? I mean, he just really fucking owned this role. And when he was on camera, I was just ear to ear. I mean, such a good performance by
I
him, I
couldn't wait.
thought.
I couldn't wait. If he wasn't on screen in a scene, I was like, can't wait till he comes back because he's
Yep.
just gonna keep chewing scenery. And you know, we talked about this when we recorded last night for the Epic Film Guys episode for Axel F, because he plays a pretty
Yeah, he's in that
bad guy
too.
in that
Yeah.
too. I'm like, how fucking great is it in the same week that he gets to play two pretty delicious characters in two big movies that are released in the same week? God bless him, because
Yeah.
let's face it, Kevin's had a great career, but it's not like Hollywood hasn't been the kindest to him. You know, it's not like he's had a lot of big hits over the years.
Sure.
He's done
yeah.
some stuff that hit and some stuff that missed, but God bless him. Good for him. He is a wonder in Maxxine. I just could not take my eyes off of him.
So
I
good,
couldn't
man.
stop laughing. He is great. His line delivery, just, I mean, the guy made movies during this period. This is where he
Yeah.
became big. Footloose.
That's
I mean,
what I was
come
going to
on,
say.
dude.
That was,
Yeah.
beautiful. I
So,
mean, it's a beautiful poetic justice for him to be in this movie portraying roles that he was not only watching at the time, but was in some scenarios. And fast forward 40 years or whatever, and he's doing it again and portraying it in that era. And yeah, his return to horror, of course, kind of starting out in that genre as a young kid. I mean, I thought it was poetic in that way too, but I'm like you, man. He was a scene stealer in this movie. Elizabeth Debicki I also really liked as kind of the hard-nosed producer. She played Princess Di on
Elizabeth
The Crown
Benda.
this past year.
Yes. Yeah, she's
Yeah,
great.
Elizabeth Benda.
Yeah. Yeah, she's fantastic. I will say this, not a lot of the performances in the movie stuck out to me in a huge way, but there are a handful here where they really did. I mean, seeing Giancarlo Esposito in the movie,
It's great, man.
I mean, he's chewing scenery too. He's great. I wish I got to see more of him.
I know.
I feel like we didn't get as much. Then,
Yeah.
I mean, Sophie Thatcher, who's a great up-and-comer, loved her in Yellow Jackets, loved seeing her in everything except the Boogeyman. God, was she wasted in that giant pile of shit.
I never saw that one.
Oh, good.
Never saw.
I wouldn't say. See, someone just reminded me today. Don't say to people that they don't need to watch a movie because they might like it. But Gerald, I know you,
yeah.
so I can say to you, don't watch
Nah.
The Boogeyman. You'll
Nah.
be fine without it. But
Yeah.
she's still good in that. Great here. Love seeing her show up in this, and she's got another movie. You know, she's got Heretic showing up later this year as well.
Oh yeah, I want to see that
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So great cast, but to your point about Kevin Bacon, West could have been like super cliche and filled this movie full of 80s Hollywood stars. He
Oh,
didn't do
sure.
that. He just grabbed Kevin Bacon and said everyone else is just going to be whoever I choose for these roles. So I was happy about that.
Yeah, Maxine's story and this, because this is obviously after the events of X, I guess 6 years later. Her whole thing starting with X is, I want to be a star. I'm a star. I want everybody else to know I'm a star. She became a star. It was a porn star, right? It was an adult film star. She made money doing that. She was able to support herself doing that. Obviously, was well respected and good at that. But she wanted more, right? She wanted to be taken seriously, and she wanted to, be in the big budget films and the Academy
I
films.
always knew I wanted to be famous.
She wanted to do like that Tracy Lords kind of switch, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're porn and then you're doing real movies. And so following her path and that kind of simple story of wanting to make it in Hollywood, I think that's just beautiful, man. I mean, that's like a very simple story that literally any of us could connect to, whether we're in the arts or not. Like, we just want to make it. We just want to be a success. We just want to have something that our life's going to mean something when we're gone. And that's kind of Maxine's drive through this whole, trilogy. Obviously, Pearl kind of stands on its own a little bit, as, like I already said, kind of a one-off. But generally speaking, that's the through line of this whole series. What did you think of, before we wrap up, I want to ask you what you thought of the very heavy-handed inclusion of Psycho into this movie. And obviously there's Hitchcock influence here too, I think, of all the other stuff that we've been
you
mentioning.
can't have thriller or slasher without Hitchcock. Let's be very fucking clear here. You can't have Giallo without Hitchcock. So
I agree.
That inclusion, and what I loved is that West was so fucking bold that he just wrote it into the script without even thinking, like without even asking.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
yeah. And do I? Yeah, sure.
Can I actually get the rights to show that? And the Hitchcock family was like, yeah, sure, feel free. And God bless him. I keep saying that, like God's gonna just rain down gold on all these people. But like for real though, like including something that connects to something that people forget that, Hitchcock is the granddaddy of the slasher, motherfucker. Like, we wouldn't have what we have today without Alfred Hitchcock.
Yep.
So I loved it. And that whole running chase sequence had me on the floor laughing because it was so goddamn ridiculous.
It really was, yeah. It was 80s. It was 80s. It was like the chasing the 80s film.
Dude, Maxxxine is just running around, and Kevin Bacon's chasing her. John
and you run up the stairs to the Psycho house to get away from the fucking guy. I mean, it was weird.
The one thing that happened, I was just expecting, was I was expecting her to go in the house, and I know it's a facade. Anyone that knows that, they know that it's a facade. Even those that just visit the set, or what have you, the behind the scenes. But I was expecting it to be fully built just for the sake of this movie and have him run up the stairs. And I almost expected Ty West to redo that shot from Psycho where he gets stabbed at and like go, that
falls back. The
super close up shot of him falling back the stairs, which Hitchcock talked about a lot back in the day, where like how hard it was to do that shot. Yeah. But I was expecting
okay with it.
Fuck it, dude. I mean, seriously, we've had one person, Gus Van Sant. God, I mean, he tried it. He tried to emulate Psycho. He did his goddamn best, but we haven't had it. I mean, Bates Motel was a good show, but I'm just saying, we no one picks up on the Psycho. Like everyone talks about Halloween and Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street and fill in the blank, but God damn it, I just loved the Psycho love here, and I was glad that they were able to shoot there. And
I loved how Elizabeth Debicki, when she's like giving her a tour of the lot, and we get there and she's like, "Oh, this is the house from Psycho." Like, who doesn't fucking know that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you didn't need to tell me that. It says Bates Motel. And
correct me if I'm wrong, though, Gerald. She mentions that they just shot the sequel here, which is Psycho 2, written by Tom Holland. And I like Psycho 2. I think Psycho 2 is fantastic.
I did too. I thought it was a great sequel. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I agree. Man, as we wrap up, I'll let you give your final thoughts too. I'll just say that this is a fun time. If you mentioned Stranger Things earlier, and when you look at modern takes on the 80s, not a lot of productions get it right. I feel like if you can trust in anyone from a cinematic perspective, you can trust in Ty West. He gets it right here for the most part. It's really fun to watch. It's beautiful to look at. Mia Goth is a queen in this, just like she's been in everything else. Great supporting characters led by Kevin Bacon, who just chews up the camera every time he's on screen. This is a fun watch. The last 20 minutes, it fell off a cliff for me from a conclusion to a trilogy perspective. Ironically, Justin, I kind of want to see what happens next with Maxxine more than I want to see what we just saw with her, because I don't know, she wasn't as prominent of a plot vehicle driving forward, especially when you get to the last act of the film. It became less about her journey. And I kind of want to see how she kind of picks up the pieces now that she's in this big production and obviously going to be dealing with what happened in the tragedy of the conclusion. You know what I mean? Like, I would love to see what happens the next 5 years of her life. I don't know if we ever will, but I'm just saying I am glad this exists. I just wish that last act had, I don't know, tied in the Night Stalker, or maybe Elizabeth Debicki could have been the villain, as this kind of crooked producer. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
or do anything remotely interesting or creative.
I don't want to fall into the trap either. You said it earlier. I don't want to fall into the trap. I'm not going to tell Ty West how to do anything. The guy's a genius. So I don't want to fall in that trap or whatever. But in reviewing it and talking about it, if it weren't for that last 20 minutes, this probably would have been an 8 or 9 for me easily, if it could have found a way to stick the landing. But as a horror fan, as a fan of a lot of that 80s stuff that we mentioned, and even stuff like Boogie Nights, you see influences there from that type of film. All About Eve. I mean, there's a lot of movies that are kind of the blueprint for this film, and especially if you have a knowledge or like any of those old films. It's funny because you were talking about Gateway, and I think that could be a beautiful thing about this trilogy, because seeing Maxxine, I haven't seen the movie Angel, and I haven't seen
Dude, I just rewatched
Miss 45 in probably like 10 years.
Miss 45 is one of my favorites.
I love them.
Angel, I rewatched on Friday because our hardcore listener and good friend of mine, Maurice, mentioned how big of an influence he felt it was, and I was like, I haven't watched it in forever, so I watched it Friday, and it's definitely a big influence here.
Where did you watch it, if you don't mind me asking?
Tubi, baby, for
it's
free.
On Tubi. Okay.
Yeah, it's on Tubi.
Because I wanted to see specifically Miss 45 and Angel again after seeing this, which, I know those movies, but I mean, I think it could be a great gateway film for a lot of that older stuff too, that, like you said, I mean, this movie wouldn't exist without that stuff. I mean, obviously. So I liked it a lot. I wish I could have said I loved it like I did a movie like Pearl. But I think it's a worthy addition to the trilogy, and I think Ty West is a genius, and I can't wait to see what he does next. So 7 out of 10 for me. What are your final thoughts on it, man?
I mean, I can't say that much more than I already have. Super entertaining. I think the third act just kind of just drizzles. It doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't land with a bang. Yeah. For lack of a better word, it goes through the motions. I feel like he knew where he wanted to start. He knew where he wanted that middle, but the ending, he knew what the conclusion should be, but he didn't really know how to get there in an impactful way. So that's why it feels abrupt. The movie jumps forward way too quickly, and it's inspired by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in terms of like, let's have this big shocking. No, man, you didn't. You just Satanic Panic, cool. Do something interesting with it. Tie in the Night Stalker. Give me a few more kills. I mean, we got some good kills in the movie. We have that one scene in the in the fucking alleyway where we hear squish really loud, and I was jumping out of my seat really excited about that.
The old ball stomp. Yeah,
that was great. And then of course we have the video store kill, which is why I liken this to much more of a De Palma thriller than a slasher, because what De Palma would do is he would lead you in and have you the whole time. Then he'd give you one severe, brutal, offensive thing that he was going to show you. Dressed to Kill, Body Double, Raising Cain, fill in the fucking blank. And then you'd be just enamored by it. And then the rest of the movie, you would just be sitting there thinking about it. And I feel like West attempted that with the video store kill, if you will, which I thought was very well done, very gruesome. It was good. Very Giallo inspired as well. But the whole rest of it just felt like, I was like, there was something missing, and I felt like I wanted more. It needed more. There could have been more. would love to pick his brain on it. Of course,
It-
us lowly film critics in
Yeah,
DC
we won't
don't get interview opportunities with Ty West, so
No, no,
we're
no,
just stuck
no.
here
Yeah,
with our
yeah. I love
but
the dude though. I mean, you're
yeah,
right. We did get enough kills in this. I mean, the ball stomp was great. The her beating Kevin Bacon in the face in the fucking car was great.
that was fantastic. Yeah, I mean
There's some
his demise, Bacon's demise is I mean the build up to it is okay, and then it happens. You're like, oh, cool, but it didn't have as big of an impact as you would
right,
expect it should in that
right.
moment. So again, a good movie,
Yeah,
solid, entertaining. The soundtrack, give me a fucking break.
so
The
good, man.
songs put in here, I didn't get mad about any of the needle
No,
drops here. You got ZZ Top, you got Rat, you got Judas Priest, you got, of course, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which is a very clear body double reference. I mean,
absolutely.
there's a whole bunch, So how could I not enjoy this movie? It just
I'm with you,
not
man.
amazing. It's good, just not
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly. It's fine. It's just not as good as I feel like it could have been. It brought the trilogy down just a little bit, but it's like we already said. I mean, it's one of the more memorable trilogies in horror. Period.
And Gerald,
Definitely
every trilogy
modern
has a
history.
week
Yeah,
installment, and I said this to you pre-show. It's okay for a movie to be just good, just
right,
okay, just fine. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, and it doesn't have to be a piece of shit.
right, right. It's okay. Like I get hit sometimes. You don't like that enough. And I'm like, I liked it, dude. Like, what are you talking about?
I
You liked it
liked
more
the
than I did.
movie.
That's fine.
I will buy it. I already pre-ordered
You
Maxxxine on
know,
4K, Ultra
yeah,
HD. I'll watch it again. I'll watch it with
yeah.
the other two.
Me
I
too.
am still waiting for A24 to announce their listing of the entire trilogy on 4K for 175
Ooh,
fucking dollars, because I'm sure that's how much they'll charge for it, because
God,
A24 is notorious for that. But I do
God.
have the Puritan 2 sitting here, the
I know you
VHS
showed me
case,
that
as
last
I
night.
showed you
That's
last
great.
night,
Yeah,
and I do have
that's great.
the Maxxine fucking Minx pin
Button.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
so
I love it, dude. All right, so it's fine, guys. Maxine from Justin and I. Justin, thanks so much for being here, man. A 7 from him, a 7 from me as well. So a 7 overall from the show this week on Maxine. Next week, we are going to dive into Long Legs. I got a first-time guest
day
coming on the show to
long.
discuss that with me. It's Perkins, by the way, Anthony Perkins' son. A little more
Yeah, yeah, which most
psycho
people don't
conversation.
seem to know, which is
Oh,
crazy.
wow. Yeah, yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that film. I haven't seen it as we're recording, but I will be seeing it in the next week, and then we're going to talk about that on next week's show. Justin, the Epic Film Guys, one of the shows that I started listening to when I found out what a podcast was. I love you dudes. I always have from day one. Tell them where they can find you, what they need to look up to find you and your boys over there.
Yeah, I mean, you can search it anywhere at Epic Film Guys, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, in terms of social media. And of course, we are available on every single podcast platform. And if you love Gerald and his bald ass head and his sick ass beard, he's done a lot of cool shit on the Epic Film Guys. There's a ton of content actually that
Including
includes
this
him.
week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, with the Beverly Hills Cop XLF and some other stuff the past couple of years. Check it out, man. Thanks for
Yeah.
listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me for the Axel F discussion. And we're crossovering all over the place this week. And you were on here for this, and it was great, man. And you know I love you. And aside from podcasting, you're one of my best friends, man. So I really appreciate you. And
Aw.
I always love when we can get together and chat movies, too. So it means a lot to me, man. Thanks
Appreciate
for
it,
being here.
man. Anytime. You know this. You know this. Yeah, I mean, your main co-host may not feel the same about me, but listen, I'm always
Nah,
here
he's
for you.
fine. He's fine. He loves you, too. He tells me how much he loves you every time we
Oh,
record.
I do miss him. I miss him.
Yeah.
What
I
are you
do, too.
drinking?
Where the
What
fuck
are you
is he?
drinking?
Like,
What are you
he's coming
drinking?
back.
What am I drinking? I don't know.
Puke
Puke and rally or
and
something?
rally,
I don't
baby.
know.
Puke and rally,
I'm
baby.
doing something. I'm doing something, but
I remember all those sound drops.
love you guys.
All right, man. Thanks for being here again. And, guys, we will see you next week when we talk Long Legs. I can't wait. Thanks for tuning in this week, guys. We will see you next time.